very much for coming today. My name's Olivia, and I work at the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and my team's role is stakeholder engagement. So we do lots of workshops. We organise the State Heritage Conference. I'm just going to get rid of that. I would like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and we'd like to also acknowledge the lands of the people online may be on if they're on a different country. And I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners, past, present, and future. Okay, so as this workshop is a Heritage Basics workshop, I'm assuming that some people in the room, if not most people in the room, may not have a background in heritage, may be dealing with heritage places that they may not know a lot about in terms of heritage. So I thought I would start the day before we get to some case studies, just to give a bit of a context of heritage, heritage values, Heritage Act, and the Borough Charter. So these are all so you're familiar with the terms if you're not already. So heritage values. Heritage values provide a connection with the past and help people to understand a shared cultural heritage. Heritage values are communicated through stories about places, people, and events. And it comes in many forms, such as tangible and intangible heritage values. So tangible heritage values, as you can see on the screen, are buildings and monuments, archaeological sites, and landscapes. These places are the most prevalent that you will be dealing with in your worlds in local government and us in the state government. So there are also intangible heritage values, such as landscape, language, music and dance, and storytelling. So as humans, we associate stories with places. And I'm sure many of you have stories associated with special places in your lives. So maybe it was attending a sporting event where you connected with the crowd, all cheering for the same team, or celebrating a life milestone at a special place, or even a special place in nature where you like to visit. So scaling this up, heritage listed places on a local government list or a state government list are significant for specific communities, or the local government, or even for the whole of the state. So they're telling those bigger stories from an individual story to a wider story. So the Borough Charter is our guiding document in heritage, and it's produced by Australian ICOMOS, which is the International Council on Monuments and Sites. If you're not aware, ICOMOS is a non-governmental professional organisation formed in 1965, and its primary role is to advise UNESCO on heritage matters and the philosophy, terminology, methodology, and techniques of cultural heritage conservation. The Charter is a standard of practice for the conservation and management of heritage listed places in Australia. And it sets out conservation principles. So what is conservation and understanding the significance of a place, conservation processes, the methods of change, such as restoration, maintenance, and reconstruction of a place, as well as other methods, and heritage conservation practice, which is managing change through conservation management plans and works that respect the heritage of the place. So conservation principles start by understanding the reasons a place is significant through research and conducting an assessment on its cultural heritage significance using the criteria aesthetic, historic, scientific, social, and spiritual values. Aesthetic, obviously, it looks nice. It demonstrates an architectural style. Historic, it might be associated with a particular person, a particular phase of development in a local government area or in the state. It may have scientific value if it demonstrates research value or demonstrates a scientific element or story to the local government area or the state. Social value, obviously important to a particular community, or its use, the buildings or places use is of community value. So it could be like a hall where lots of community events happen. So it's got that social value. And spiritual is often a place of worship or a place of spiritual significance or cultural practice, or spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be a building, it could be a natural landscape place. So that's just a quick overview of those values. So to understand the methods of change, documentation like the Conservation Management Plan is written to guide conservation works and future management of the place, keeping in mind a place's cultural heritage significance. And these documentations, written by a consultant, manage that place's new work or interpretation. So telling the stories of that place and making it live for the whole community. So these steps, as outlined in the Borough Charter, are used for assessing a place. They're used for conducting a heritage assessment for your local heritage survey, or even doing a state assessment for state listed places. So I'll finish up with going through the Heritage Act really quickly. So the Heritage Act, it guides our work and aspects such as creating local heritage surveys, what's included on the state register, what works need to be referred to the Heritage Council from local governments, and also defines what a heritage place is or is not. I'm not sure how many people have delved into the Heritage Act. Any smiles or yes, a few people, that's good. So this is a quick overview so you can sort of get those key bits of information out. So it defines cultural heritage significance for WA using those Borough Charter values. And it also notes that cultural heritage significance is embodied in the place, in its fabric, its setting, its use, associations, meanings, records, related places and related objects. So it's not just one particular building on a building lot, it's any outbuildings associated with the primary building, it's the landscape around that primary building, it's everything on that particular lot. So a place, I've been using the word place a lot and haven't really defined it. So the Act defines it as a defined or readily identifiable area of land, and that can include archaeological remains, buildings, structures, other built forms, as I just mentioned. Importantly, it also now includes the new Act, equipment, furniture, fittings, and other objects associated with the place. So if it was a farming property, it might be some machinery that may be out in the landscape, or any fittings to outbuildings. Gardens or man-made parks and sites, or a tree or group of trees, whether natural or planted adjacent to a man-made setting. So a place cannot be included as a cultural heritage place under the Act if it is primarily for natural heritage reasons or for Aboriginal heritage reasons. So a place can have both of those values, Aboriginal and built heritage values, or natural heritage values and built heritage values, but it has to have a cultural heritage reason as outlined with those 5 values. Otherwise it comes under other legislation. So I'm not saying those places aren't important, they just don't fall under the Act. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a context to where we are talking about, and I will hand over to my colleague Liza, who will start going through some case studies. Got a technical issue? Yes, we have. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name's Liza. I'm a Senior Heritage Officer in Historic Heritage Conservation and my background's in architecture. I'm going to talk to you about heritage listings and developing a heritage place today. So firstly, when we talk about heritage, one area of confusion is regarding the types of heritage listings. In WA, historic heritage places can be recorded under a number of different types of listings. Some give statutory protection and others don't. For example, a local heritage survey is a starting resource for local heritage planning and has no statutory role, whereas the State Register of Heritage Places is reserved for places of cultural heritage significance and is the highest recognition afforded to the state level. This is important to understand because heritage listing type will determine the requirements for managing changes to the place, where to go for advice and for approvals. So statutory listings are administered under the applicable legislation, which is what Alethea has previously spoken about. And the key listing types to be aware of are shown on the screen. I'll just give you an example of some of the places that sit under those listing types. So National Heritage List, an example is Fremantle Prison or Fitzgerald River National Park. For Commonwealth Heritage listings, it's places like Cape Leeuwin Lighthouse or Ningaloo Marine Area. For the State Register of Heritage Places, that includes His Majesty's Theatre. And then we have our local government listings, which there's two types. The Local Heritage Survey, which was formerly the municipal inventory, but we now refer to it as the Local Heritage Survey. And this is a non-statutory, and it identifies and records places that are or might be of cultural heritage significance. And then we have the heritage list, and that's statutory. An example, which we have up on the screen there, Memorial Hall which is on the City of Coburn's heritage list. Other listings include non-statutory registers and surveys, and these, which you can see, hopefully you can, sorry, that little bit's in front there. You can see up there on the screen, which are the National Trust, the Register of National Estate, Statewide Hotel Survey, and the Art Deco Significance Building Survey. And I'm sure there's more as well. They're just some of the ones that we've picked out. So, listings can be viewed on the department's Inherit database, which I'm sure you've all used. So I'm just going to quickly go through how to use the database for those that are not that familiar with it. So this will usually identify all known listings applicable to a place. And to search the database, you visit our website, which is at inherit.wa.gov.au. Now, if you know the name of the place, you can put it in the contains name search bar just there at the top. You don't need to know the full name. You can just type in the first few letters or a part name and you'll be able to search for it. If you don't know the name or a part of the name, then you can search by address, which is probably an easier search if you're not really familiar with the place. And then, or if you know the place number, you can enter that down the bottom as well. Then just press search and it will come up with multiple search results. So then you can select, which you can click on the second image there. You can select the place that you're looking for. If it is state registered, it will have the HC icon next to it and it will say state registered. So for those people who are ringing up asking if their house is on the state register or a building that they own is on the state register, you do a very quick search and you'll be able to tell very quickly if it is on the state register. Then if you click on the icon that says Heritage Council, that will then take you to another screen. It'll take you to the second screen, and here you'll be able to see all the classifications. So this is a bit more in depth. So the first screen, you can just tell very quickly if it's on the state register. The second screen, you can tell, it will tell you what kinds of listings the place has. So we're going to have a look at a couple of examples here that I've put up on the screen. The first one is Fremantle Prison. We're using this one because it has a lot of listing types against it. So there's 4 tiers of statutory listings. That's the World Heritage List, National Heritage List, State Register, and Local Government Heritage List. And there's 3 known non-statutory listings, and that's the National Estate, National Trust List of Classified Places, and the Local Heritage Survey. So as we can see, Fremantle Prison is on the State Register, and the register entry and assessment documentation have been provided. So you can click on those icons there that say register entry and assessment details, and you'll be able to get a full assessment regarding the place. So you can look a little bit more in depth into why it's on the state register. Then if we have a look at, sorry, accidentally did that. Okay, so then if we look at the example of Armidale Post Office. So this one does not have any statutory listings. It's not on the state register because we don't have any of those icons that have appeared there for it. But it is on the Local Heritage Survey. Now, on our Inherit website, it still says municipal inventory, but it is actually the Local Heritage Survey. And it has been recognised by the Armidale Development Authority. So there's no statutory protection over this place. But yeah, there's some examples. And if you've got any questions about how to use Inherit, I'm happy to talk to you at the end. I can go through it in a bit more detail if there's any queries about that. So what's the key differences with these types of listings? Let's start with the state register. It's an entry in the state register reserved for places of state cultural significance, and it's the highest recognition afforded to the state. Currently, there's 1,386 places on the state register, and that's a mix of buildings, structures, gardens, cemeteries, memorials, landscapes, and archaeological sites. The state register is managed by the Heritage Council with the assistance of the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. Entry in the state register means that any changes or works proposed to the place need to be referred, and usually this happens by the responsible local government, and the Heritage Council will provide advice. This does not mean a place cannot be adapted or changed to meet contemporary. The image shows some places that are, images here show places on the state register. And if we have a look at Victoria House, which is in the centre there, it's a great example of adaptive reuse. And the Heritage Council and the department worked very closely with the proponent throughout their development, and we achieved a very good heritage outcome. So let's talk about local government heritage listings, starting with the Local Heritage Survey. A local heritage survey is a detailed survey of places of local cultural heritage significance. HECWA publishes guidelines for local heritage surveys, which are available on our website. So if you need any further details, we can help you find that. A local heritage survey acts as an important record of places for local heritage significance, but it has no statutory weight. It's ground zero of heritage place protection. It serves as a starting point for a place to be recognised for its heritage significance. A local heritage survey is used to inform the heritage list or heritage areas which are afforded protection under local planning schemes. Now onto heritage lists. A heritage list is a list established under the Planning and Development Act of 2005, which affords statutory protection to listed places under the local government planning scheme. So whereas a local heritage survey would include places of local heritage significance in value from exceptional to little significance, a heritage list would typically be those included in the higher orders. So possibly category 1 or 2, or it could also include category 3. And the Acts and Regs outline requirements for entering and removing a place from a heritage list. Now let's talk about developing a heritage place for good heritage outcomes. So we often get the exasperated statement, a heritage listed means I can't do anything. It's a common misconception, but heritage places can and are adapted to meet the changing needs. It just needs a bit of thought, and sometimes you have to think outside the box. We encourage owners to discuss proposals with our heritage development team at a conceptual stage prior to lodging any formal applications with the decision maker. A key objective of the Heritage Act is to encourage and facilitate the conservation, continued use, development and adaptive reuse of places of cultural heritage significance. So heritage places can be adapted or changed to meet contemporary needs. Changes must be in harmony with the cultural heritage significance of the place. We achieve this by following the Borough Charter conservation principles, which Alethea has previously spoken about. And we ask that you consider what is significant about the place, how the proposed change might impact on the significance, and what mitigating measures you may need to consider to minimise an adverse impact. When considering making changes to a place, some of the basic principles are considered. Is the new work easily distinguishable from the old? Are the alterations reversible, or are they respecting all significant periods of construction? So up on the screen here, we've got a development at Penshurst House in Fremantle. So this development was in, this place was in a dilapidated state, and the owners have done some significant conservation works to it, but it didn't quite meet their contemporary needs. So they have put an extension to the rear, and we can see on the slides on the right hand side there, it's quite contemporary. You can easily identify that it's a new portion of the place. So they also worked very closely with us when they were doing this, and although the development was done some time ago, they still contact us regularly when they're wanting to do any kind of upgrades, maintenance on the place. So we do keep in contact with our heritage places and owners of heritage places. So let's talk about the development principles. So HECWA has also developed its own set of principles for state registered places based on the Borough Charter. Significant elements are outlined in the Statement of Significance and the assessment documentation, which I showed you before on the Inherit website. HECWA will always refer to the state significance and assessed values of a place. We have statutory and strategic responsibility to review and provide advice on development of heritage places to ensure cultural heritage significance is maintained while allowing for contemporary use and adaptation. And you can see here, these are the development principles, and they're also available on our website. We have some other useful publications on our website. Some of them are up here on the screen. We refer to these when we're looking at development proposals that come through to us, but they're also available for you to have a look at if you need to get any further information, or would like to, if you're looking at a proposal that's come through and you think you might need to have a quick look at any of these publications as well. And there's a whole pile of other ones on our website, like removing paint from masonry, cleaning stone masonry. There's policies and practice notes for corrugated metal roofs, painting, etc. There's a whole stack of different publications on our website. Useful. So let's talk about development referrals. A decision maker must refer a proposal that impacts a state registered place to the Heritage Council and render advice that is consistent with the Heritage Council's advice. So one of the Heritage Council outcome and key effectiveness indicators relates to the extent to which a development approval issued for a registered place is consistent with its advice. And at the moment, this equates to about 98.7%. We have 42 days to respond to your referrals, and an advice letter is sent out as findings and advice. And I think just one key point to think about when you're sending through a referral is to check that all the information is provided to us. So if there's any, if you've received a referral and you know that it has to be assessed by a development officer, if you don't have all of the plans, the documentation that goes along with the proposal, it's probably best to get back to the proponent or the applicant to ask for further information before sending it to us, because we do actually only have 42 days once we receive your referral. So if we're then having to go back to you to ask for further information, and that might take 40 days to come back to us, that only gives us 2 days to assess a place, which then becomes quite difficult because we're only a small team. So yeah, if you could just have a quick look through, make sure that all the information is there prior to sending it to us, that would be really helpful. So when is a development referral required? When undertaking certain works to heritage places, Section 73 of the Heritage Act requires referral of the proposal to the Heritage Council for advice. This relates to places that are on the State Register of Heritage Places under consideration, so on our assessment program, or places that are subject to a heritage agreement or a protection order. Generally, minor works such as maintenance and some like-for-like repairs do not need a referral, but it's best to check with an officer, because sometimes applicants think it's a like-for-like replacement, but in actual fact, when we look at it, it's possible is not. So it's really important that we just kind of have a quick flick through it, even if you're not unsure, just let us have a quick look. And we can generally turn those around very quickly and get back to you with an email, rather than having to go through the full assessment program, assessment process. If a development is adjacent to a state registered place, it also must be referred to us, because we will need to have a look at the impacts that that development will have on the state registered place. And a decision maker must refer a proposal to the Heritage Council to render advice that is consistent with Heritage Council advice. Referrals are generally dealt with at an officer level, unless it's a development that's contentious or complex, and then it would go to the Heritage Council. And as I mentioned before, we have 42 days to. So examples of kinds of works that must be referred to the Heritage Council, you can see up here. I'll just pull a few out for you, just can't really read those. So alterations and additions, construction of new buildings, demolition, relocations, re-roofing, signage, interior works, and change of use, and also adjacent development. So all of those things and a few more things need to be referred to us. So let's consider what information may be needed to inform the decision maker. So we've touched on a few of those things previously, but a few other things to think about are, do we need an independent structural or building condition report? Do the proposed works evidence consideration under what is significant about the place? Is there a conservation management plan or a conservation management strategy? And do the works conflict those policies? Do the works follow the Heritage Council's development principles? Are there any special protection orders, heritage agreements? Has there been a professionally prepared heritage impact statement, or does it require a heritage impact statement? Has there been a heritage architect or conservationist involved in the project, or does there need to be one? And is there any feasible and prudent alternative to what is being proposed that better considers the cultural heritage? So that's a really important one. Always looking at alternatives so that we can protect our heritage places. So just in conclusion, I just wanted to go through a few quick things with you. Our development team deals with approximately 60 to 80 referrals per month. So that's a lot. Please bear in mind, we're a very small team. We only have one full-time person, that's me. And the rest of our team is part-time. So we, in total, have 3 people effectively that work in our team. Yes, there's more, but they're all part-time. Makes up 3 whole people. So around 90% of our referrals are dealt with heritage officers under delegation. So that means that we are looking at your proposals, unless of course it's something that needs to go to the Heritage Council because it's complex or is contentious. We will make a very quick assessment of the referral, and then we will report back to you if we have any questions. So I think, oh, also just to let you know a bit about our expert team. It includes heritage architects, archaeologists, historians, and other cultural heritage experts. And we have extensive experience in interpreting cultural heritage values and undertaking heritage impact statements. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Yes.
You made reference to landscapes in your presentation. Have you seen many examples where trees have been placed on, like even at a local level on a local list or state listing, or is it more so complete landscaped areas that are associated with a building?
Tree. We get a lot of questions about trees, but yes, there are trees that are on the state register and also on local heritage listings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be a full landscape. But there are some. Yeah. I think there's 3 trees on the state register. So that is just solely, so 3 trees have been state registered.
Yeah.
They're cultural heritage significance. Yeah, so they're quite interesting assessments as well. Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to look at a very interesting case study now, and I'm going to hand you over to Gemma, who is from the city of Bayswater, and she's going to talk to you about the state registered Maylands Post Office. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Gemma from the city of Bayswater. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk today and talk about one of our proud local developments. So the city of Bayswater determined the development application at 160 Watley Crescent, which is located in the heart of the Maylands Activity Centre, Watley Crescent and 7th Avenue, right next to the 7th Avenue Bridge, if you know the site at all. And it's the site of the former Maylands Post Office. Included on the State Register of Heritage Places and the city's heritage list is a Category 1 building, built in 1910 and displaying the Federation pre-classic architectural style. The post office has remained a focal point of our Maylands Activity Centre. Okay, so just an overview of our Maylands Activity Centre where the development has occurred. The Activity Centre Main Street precinct, it's characterised pedestrian scale mixed-use urban area. The precinct's providing a variety of commercial and retail uses that service the local population and visitors. It's evolving really successfully with the retention of heritage buildings, traditional Main Street shop fronts, and appropriate new development, including apartments and entertainment uses such as the Lyric Lane development that you might be familiar with. Okay. That's just an extract from our local heritage survey. Okay. The design approach of the applicant, McCormack Architects, was really to approach and primarily respect the heritage building, undertaking minimal works to it. The design proposed minimal changes to the building and only needed to modify internal fabric to accommodate a toilet, which was a good outcome. With the proposed use of the proposed use of the building being for a change of use from office to cafe or for restaurant, and then with the future stage of development being the change of use from office to a future small bar. So with the proposed use being for adaptive use of the site for cafe and future small bar, the applicant considered the retention of the upper floor levels to be very important and to retain these within the addition. So that was the floor level that was set. The original floor level was maintained through into the additions, maintaining a pedestrian entrance from 7th Avenue, which is the image we're seeing to the right. The minor additions were proposed at the rear of the heritage building, incorporating the pedestrian entrance from 7th Avenue and a prominent gable element from the heritage building being extended into the additions, and with the use of a flat roof between the heritage building and the new additions, which you can just see here and in the enlarged image. The gable element was used to pay respect to the prominent rendered brick gable that faces both Watley Crescent and 7th Avenue. And it was done to respect this, but not to mimic it. And it did this by using different materials, so a steel structure rather than a brick structure. The development outcome is the retention and reuse of a heritage building, a new modern pedestrian entrance from 7th Avenue, and a generous semi-roofed courtyard in the garden setting. In response to advice received from DPLH, the awning over 7th Avenue and the new entrance will be kept free from the heritage building and will not physically be attached to it, but it will only be attached to the new addition, so keeping it quite separate. That's not shown in the approved plans because that was the ultimate condition of approval. The proposals resulted in retention, reuse and additions that acknowledge the heritage credentials of the existing post office building and results in a use that's really appropriate to its activity centre location, which is a great outcome for the city. Okay, the referral process between the City of Bayswater and the DPLH was very simple and positive. The applicant didn't undertake any pre-lodgement consultation with Department for Planning, Lands and Heritage. They undertook it with the council instead and advised that they had confidence in the process and that we'd undertake that consultation on their behalf with Department for Planning, Lands and Heritage. So I think that speaks really well to the architect and the applicant's understanding of that process and comfort within the process. So very simple process. We all know the process under the Heritage Act. For most of us as stat planners, we're able to generate these letters pretty automatically in our systems and get that triggered to send something off to DPLH, which we did. So I've prepared a letter, I've sent off plans and the associated documentation to DPLH and sought their referral comments under that Heritage Act process. DPLH acknowledged the application immediately, put me in contact with the assessing officer, which is Liza, who we all seem to know as our assessing officer, and I was able to have immediate and direct contact with Liza if I needed it, which is really helpful. Clear timeframes were provided by DPLH right at the start. They told us of the 42-day referral process, which we were able to then work into our timeframes and feed back to the applicant. In the case of this application, we had a tight deadline. It's an important project that we needed to get to a specific council meeting. I let Liza know about timeframes, and we were able to obviously get that advice within that timeframe. I think most importantly in this case, the applicant was submitting additional information at the request of the city, and it was coming in a little bit piecemeal, particularly because of the timeframes. So I was having to send that information through individually through to Liza, which did result in some additional time being required to review that. And that was very transparent in the process. We were informed, still able to work within our council timeframes. I think, great clear timeframes, flexibility in referring revised documentation through to the DPLH, willingness to work with the local government to meet council deadlines, clear and implementable recommendations and conditions that were provided to us that were then conditioned on the development approval that need to be adhered to. And I think, as I said at the start, the applicant and the city being confident in this process. So I think the summary, the application was presented to and determined by council within the required statutory timeframe, and with the outcomes of the DPLH referral process being addressed in conditions that the architect's now working on to address with some revised changes. And a development approval that's resulted in retention of a heritage building, reuse, adaptability, and a contribution to our Maylands Activity Centre. Thank you.
Now we're going to have some other case studies from the City of Fremantle. So I'd like to welcome Gina Binet.
I'm Gina Binet, I'm the Coordinator of Heritage at the City of Fremantle, and I'm part of a team with Annabelle Wills who look after, who are involved with all aspects of heritage and conservation in Fremantle. My first slide here is an acknowledgement of the Wallula, which is the traditional name of Fremantle area where we work. And this beautiful slide here shows a sketch from 1829. And if you can see on the far right side is actually the Swan River. And if you look out, you can see Arthur Head and what was Rouse Head and out towards Rocknest. And it's just I always show it to people because I think it's a beautiful reminder of the past. What I really wanted to talk to you about was that Fremantle has a large number of heritage places. We've got approximately 2,500 places on our heritage list. The bulk of these places are residential buildings with a level 3 management category. There's about 1,600 of those. And we've also got 18 heritage areas. So we have a lot of heritage buildings. Our level 3 places are on the heritage list, unlike some other local governments that aren't. So one of the things I would recommend if you're working in Fremantle is, or any local government really, is to check straight away with Inherit to see if it's on the heritage list, and try and get an understanding of why it's there, what's significant about it, and also if it's in a heritage area, what's significant about the surrounding streetscape, and think about the context of where you're working. So from a local government aspect, these are the questions you need to be sort of asking people who are coming in for preliminary planning advice. So most of the buildings in Fremantle were constructed between the 1890s and First World War, and they exhibit characteristics of the Georgian Victorian style. They've got a central front door with either 4 or 2 rooms. They have a hipped roof and a front veranda line the facade. There are other types of buildings, but this is predominantly the form that you find, especially on the west side of Hampton Road. So with the level 3 place in Fremantle indicate that it has cultural significance to Fremantle as well as its streetscape value. And of course, heritage places can be modified, as was discussed earlier, and adaptively reused to suit new and modern uses. But they must retain the heritage value of the house by conserving the original form of the fabric, which includes, for us, most of the rooms under the main roof of the house, not just the facade or the front veranda, but actually the roof form of the main section of the house. Beyond that, there's often a lean-to section, which is often being much modified. That area can often be considerably changed, and we like people to put their extensions behind the house. So you can see these little diagrams. They come from Annabelle did these. These were in our local area heritage area policy, and it demonstrates how there's the main section, the original building, and there's a link, and then there's an extension built behind, much like the Maylands post office. So we have these resources, and we certainly have people to speak to, and we do encourage people to come in early and have those conversations, which the 3 case studies that I'm going to talk to, all of them came from preliminary lodgement meetings, which was really great because it meant that we could start to I'll work through some of the concerns that we had and find a good solution that suits. So this house here follows the sketch design. You can actually see at the back there's a two-storey addition, which is separated by a link. And one of the reasons why we're sort of happy with seeing this kind of development in what is predominantly a single-storey streetscape is that it's largely concealed from the street. You can certainly see it's there, and whether it had a flat roof or it had a pitched roof, it sort of doesn't greatly affect the character of the established streetscape. So this first place that I wanted to show you was in Orient Street in South Fremantle. It's a house it's a timber house from the 1890s, but it's with in a Victorian Georgian style, but it's been refurbished in the post-war era. So it's got asbestos wall cladding instead of weatherboards, and they've changed the veranda roof line and the veranda with the posts that are there. So the applicant was an architect who came to us early, and we walked through the house and talked about what's significant about it. And the most significant part of the house was under the main roof. That's actually not a tile roof, that's an aluminium domestic tile roof. But the idea was to try and create something that really fit in the landscape. They wanted to build a single story, and they wanted to build a sort of a courtyard house. And they were looking at trying to respond to the form and scale and the massing of the building in a slightly new way. So it was going to be obviously different, but it was going to fit with that. So what they ended up doing is they show here is these are the lesser significant parts of the house where there's more change occurs. So there's quite a bit of modification to the central section, and then the rear additions beyond that, which were removed. So the new house that's been built here, they've retained the significant elements of the front of the house, and they've replacing the weatherboard cladding, so they're actually improving the character of the place. And then they've got quite a strong link building with another pavilion out the back. So when you look at it in section, you can sort of see how the roof forms all sort of sit together. The new roof actually then behind the existing roof. We often like to have that separate, but in this instance, because you could really understand the shape of the roof with the hips and things, we felt that was still clear. So that worked really well. So we were quite happy with that as a design. The next one, also here are some of the images of it from the street, and you can see that it still continues to sit very well in the street, and it's not being dominated by a large extension. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of places too, when they're sort of semi-built over the front of a small cottage and completely overwhelm it. So in this instance, we're very pleased with that. The next one that's come along is Stoke Street in White Gum Valley. This is more of a interwar era timber cottage in a pretty intact streetscape. And it's already got these photos here, it's already got an extension that's being made to the back, a single story extension. But as is the case in Fremantle, like most of the metropolitan area, people's houses are getting bigger and bigger. And they wanted to build a two-story extension behind, and actually have tucked in behind the roof of this house to actually have a deck, so they could sit up and enjoy the sunset. So when they first came and spoke to us, you can see this image on the left-hand side. Can you see those strange little fins poking out on top of the roof? That's because the deck has to have screening because of overlooking. And but you can see that the house beyond, even though it's a two-story extension, it's actually quite concealed still. So we felt like the bulk and scale of that was okay, but these fins were a real problem. So we went and we worked with them, and they changed it and modified it so that you can see on the right now that they got rid of the fins, and they've kept the main roof the original roof intact, and it's actually just tucked in between the two parts of the building. So it's actually concealed there. So, but you can see the scale of the addition that's been built behind, that's been tucked in behind this existing house. So it's they had put quite a lot of thought into this, and they've also managed to retain the interior of the original sort of 3 main rooms of the house that had been retained after the previous additions. So, and this next one is kind of interesting because it's a very rare sort of late 20th century building on our heritage list in Fremantle. It's this is up in North Fremantle in Thompson Road. So North Fremantle is a really interesting area because not only has it got a lot of heritage houses from the late 19th, early 20th century, but it's got a lot of industrial heritage. So especially, I mean, you think of the Dingo Flour Mill and what was Matilda Bay Brewery, which was the Ford factory, and the Wheaties factory, soap factory. There's all sorts of development through here. So it's quite a mixed area, which is what I was trying to show with some photos of some of the streetscape of where this building is and some of the industrial streetscape. Now, this particular building, I was only made aware of it recently because it was hidden away behind a very thick wall, screen wall. It's actually an old sound recording studio that was built in the 60s. And it was designed by Ivan Ivanov, which is really interesting. It's one of his very minor buildings. It's not fancy and spectacular like Smith's housing, but it is a beautifully designed thing for what it is. The exterior of it has been really carefully considered. All the block work's been lined up. It's got fabulous entrances with like grisole brickwork and little sort of tiny courtyard gardens. And the bulk of it inside, though, was completely inward looking. No windows at all. Really a very interesting building. Here's the original plans for it. Originally, they were going to retain the heritage house and modify it and add on to it. But I think they gave up on that fairly quickly and that got knocked away. So this was in 68 was when it was built. And there's Martin Clark, who was the owner of Clarion Records, who developed the High Fidelity Studio in 1968. And at the time, they were trying to experiment with acoustics, so they got these strange walls stuffed with sand. It didn't work, unfortunately. It was the soundproofing didn't work, and they upset the neighbours. They only stayed there for about 3 years. So even though it had been allowed to be built there because it was an industrial area, it was then deemed to be too noisy for the residents. So it then became a community radio station, but for most of its life, it was a chemical laboratory. And then it was sold recently, and it was bought by a couple who wanted to turn it into a house, which is extremely challenging because it's not got much in the way of windows. It's very inward looking. I'll show you here's some photos of the exterior that show you it's the block work, and it shows you it's got quite a bit of original joinery, and inside a lot of sort of original joinery. There's a bit of asbestos in there too, of course, because of the house of the era. And this big blank wall you see at the front, if I go back, you'll see that it did originally have a nice iron-off sculptural frieze on that they chipped off and rendered. So, which was very sad. This is the interior of it. So it's pretty industrial. It's painted blockwork, vinyl. And those windows were actually added later. They were added in when it was a laboratory because they wanted to have some natural light in these rooms. So we had a lot of conversations about this one. The architect came in early and we talked a lot about what was significant about it. And there was 2 things that were being balanced up. One of them was the clarity and the purity of the facades and the design of the courtyards features at the entrances. And then there was the internal layout. So when they first came and spoke to us, they were going to remove a lot of walls in the building, and we needed to find a way to mitigate so we wouldn't lose as much of the internal fit out. So we sort of worked through it, and a lot more walls were kept, and they found a way to retain and interpret some of the thick walls of the original studio. So the major move they had was to conserve the exterior, to block up the windows that had been added later, and to reinstate the original frieze out the front and retain sort of original features, and then create a courtyard in what was the recording studio, the larger of the recording studios, so that all the natural light, all the house is lit by this courtyard. So it's a really interesting design. And these are some of the sketches that they did to try and show where the walls were and how they're being interpreted. Because in some cases they became seats or they became features, and it was retained. If this had been a place on the state register, we probably would have wanted to retain a lot more. But it was, it seemed like a really good solution, and it sort of sits well with the existing design of the place. So it'll be really interesting to see it. I can't wait to see it when it's actually built and how it turns out. So they were, I don't know, just 3 examples of having conversations with people, because I guess being able to have those conversations early means that we can resolve issues in a good way, rather than sometimes when things get brought in at the last minute, you've then got to ask people to take their drawings back and change them and modify them, which does happen. We don't like issuing just straight up rejections. We would prefer to let people know you've submitted drawings. We're not happy with this from a heritage perspective because you're losing too much of the value of the place. Have you considered this? Could you try that? And we try and work with them, because we want to get a good result. And we realise that in some instances there has to be a bit of a level of on balance decisions where you can say we might be losing this aspect, or this might be a bit diminished, but we are gaining because the facade treatment is being improved and the contribution it's making to the street, or they're conserving other elements. So there's sort of a balance that we try and find. So I hope that's been helpful. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi everybody, I'm Catherine Leader. I'm on the Heritage Council. I have brought show and tell for you today. Look at this. We have our own high vis. How good is that? So you will see us out and about a bit more with our high vis. Kaya, and good morning. I've been on the Heritage Council for 3 years. I've also been an elected member of City of Perth for 3.5 years now, almost 4. So it's a good session for me to be at. I'm here today to just talk briefly about the Heritage Council, which, as you know, of course, is the state's independent expert body on cultural heritage, established under the Act. Who's read the Act? Oh my God, how good is that? Okay, I'm just going forward. Yep. Council members are appointed by the Minister, as you probably read, the people who read the Act will know this, based on various skills and expertise. At the present, we have some really interesting members on the Heritage Council. We have people with deep knowledge of heritage conservation. We have deep knowledge of architecture. We have deep knowledge of history. We have town planning. We have law and governance. It's quite an interesting panel and quite interesting discussions that we have. Each of our members brings different knowledge and experience, of course, but we make decisions collectively, applying those and discussing in the room and taking account of all the information provided by you and the proponents. There are 9 council members, and we also have the ability to co-opt members. So if we need some specialist advice, we get them onto the council, which is really great. We've got somebody at the moment to give us some special advice about the intersections of our heritage with the Aboriginal heritage. The role and the objectives of the council are, of course, in the Act. These are really wide-ranging. So they include very broad functions like identifying, conserving, protecting places of cultural heritage significance, and of course to advise the Minister. We have sort of 3 broad categories. We register, and we advise, and we provide assistance. So we try to do a lot of things I know it feels like we might be faceless people inside a room, but we are trying to be more accessible and more out there for everybody to access. And if anyone's been in the room with us, we are really trying to provide guidance where we can. Of course, we assess and document places, administer the register, provide advice, try to prevent damage on places that through funding incentives and so on. For new places to be registered, they must be referred to the Heritage Council. As you know, firstly, places get assessed by the officers, followed by then the formal advice from Heritage Council and then a decision. And then the decision goes up to the Minister, and it's up to the Minister whether they're registered or not. So far on my time in Council, all of our recommended places have actually been registered by the Minister, listed by the Minister. However, I do know, and I do read sometimes in the documents that this wasn't always the case. We haven't had always committed ministers or brave ministers. Yes, we're very lucky at the moment. So once something is listed, the Heritage Council enters into an agreement, heritage agreements, obviously, with the owners and implements and advises the Minister on them as well. The department monitors those agreements and reports back to Heritage Council if needed. For development proposals, it's important to be clear, the Heritage Council is not the decision maker. We consider and provide advice and guidance and make a recommendation. But most commonly, it's you guys in local government that's a decision maker. And in this sense, we try to provide clear advice and guidance to all the LGAs. Just to give you a bit of a sense of what happens in the room. So, you know, we get our papers about a week out and we have read everything. So if there's proponents that come to us to deliver presentations, we've already read it. Then we listen to the presentations in the room and we ask questions of the officers and then proponents. The presentations, you know, they are helpful. They're really helpful for us but they're mostly helpful because we've pre-read them. And then it's important for us to ask questions we have of the proponents in the room. And that's great because all 9 of us, 10 of us are listening to the questions and the answers at the same time. The background information we read can be really lengthy. I think our biggest agenda, we had 1,700 pages to read. So it's a lot, right? Our information does definitely come with the officers' recommendations and advice notes. And once we've read all that, we have a robust discussion about any of the aspects that we're uncomfortable with. We talk to the officers, we talk to the proponents, and then we make our decision or advice. You might be surprised to know, however, that we try to weigh up our duties really with the practical. I know the previous speaker was just saying practicalness. So we understand there are things that are really hard in the heritage world. And so we will try to balance up, you know, the really conservative part of heritage versus public expectations and the practical aspects of the reality of the markets we're dealing with. Our intention is not to burden any proponent needlessly. We do know, we really know, and we really understand the resourcing and material supply issues that they're having out there. We get it. You might be further surprised to know that we refuse to list more than we ever recommend to list. Our functions under the Heritage Act include, you know, advice and all that stuff. And one thing, I'm sure you've heard this before, but we always want to reinforce it. Come early and come often, right? Come to us with anything, come to us and have a chat. We want to see it. We want to give you advice. We want to help. Don't just bring it on us at the last minute and then we're horrified with what we see. We don't want that. We welcome seeing proposals several times through its iterations. I think in my time on council, just the Fremantle Bridge, I think we've seen it 5 times, and that project's been going for 17 years. So it's been coming early and very often. I'm sure you've talked already about our policy and guideline documents. We are looking at making sure they're relevant. We update them. We make sure there's new information there, as well as, of course, education like this. And we really welcome our opportunity to wear our fabulous one of these and come to your LGAs. We like to go to site. We like to see what's coming up before us. We like to see things that are finished. We'd love to have a walk around your heritage districts. Anything like that, please get in touch. And that brings me to the other critical function, of course, of HECWA is raising public awareness. We're trying to do a bit more of that and promotion management. That's something that you might have seen our socials be starting to grow a little bit. We're trying to do a little bit more of that. And we want the public to understand that when they say, oh, this thing should be registered, well, it probably is. And they need to know where to go and get that information. One other significant example of our work was the publication of the thematic history of Western Australia. Have you already talked about that today? No? Oh, have you got one? No, I didn't bring my thematic history, but it's a really good one.
It's on the website.
It's on the website, that's right. So that was really good. So after a number of years of work, historian Clement Department and Heritage Council published the thematic history. And what's great about it is we're now going back and mapping the whole of the database against the thematic history and figuring out where there's gaps and figuring out what we haven't listed much of or what we've got way too much listed of. So that's been really, really helpful for us to operationalise something that you would think is common sense, but it's hard to do. In my mind, Heritage Council and DPLH relate quite similarly to how the local government and elected members relate. So it's really, strategic and policy direction and key decisions, which are at Heritage level, Council level, and then supported by the admin. I just want to also point out the difference between the National Trust and Heritage Council. So just for the record, the National Trust is a not-for-profit advocate for heritage around the world. In WA, the National Trust is provided with government support, but does not have a statutory role. National Trust classifies heritage places it considers significant, but that does not necessarily provide those places with any legal protection. As you know, it's your local government lists and the State Register of Heritage Places that gives those places protection. Now, I want to talk a little bit about registrations. So everybody's reading Heritage Matters or on our social media, I hope. So we've had quite a diverse range of places that have been registered recently. And what was fascinating to me when I first joined was I thought we'd be often talking about buildings, but we talk so often about bridges and jetties and other things. It's not always buildings. So just to give you an idea of the diverse things that we've been doing. So there's a site there called Duringe Moonarapan, 200 kilometres east of Perth. So that site holds archaeological importance dating back thousands of years with Aboriginal art sites, water sources, ceremonial areas, campsites, burials and grave sites. A mission was also there with a church and a former school. And, another really interesting example is the Sun City precinct in Yanchep. So that was, that actually came to us because there was a big outrage from the local community about a development up there. And they didn't want the King Neptune statue to disappear. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers the King Neptune statue. You know what I'm talking about? No. So back in the day, for the young ones in the room, right? Back in the day, there was a really important development there, which was called Atlantis Marine Park. And it had all these weird and wonderful statues, including a really big one of King Neptune. Now, we're not talking hundreds of years old. We're talking in the 80s. Right, but there was outrage from the community. We got letters and all that kind of stuff. So they came to us. They said, right, the community wants to list the statue, and we, the wonderful work of the department, brought to us: is it important? Is it not important? What's actually important about that site? And boy, did we have a robust discussion. But in the end, we did not choose that. We did not find that Neptune was particularly significant. It ended up in the secondary area of significance. But what was significant was the fact that it was the first privately developed marine park in Australia. So we listed it for that reason. So it's quite interesting, the stuff that we get to see, And just to give you, I talked about it before: bridges, gardens, parks, churches, a whole range of residential houses, precincts, industrial heritage. 22 sites along the Mundaring Kalgoorlie pipeline, 1,500 kilometres of De Grey Mullawa stock route. It's quite diverse and it's fascinating. We never have the same meeting twice. So yeah, I just wanted to go through a high level. I hope that you understand that we want to help, and we are not trying to be difficult. We're not trying to be a burden for you or the proponents at all. We want to help, but we do, and we want to balance our help with protecting these wonderful places. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here today. And I hope I get to see you out in your LGAs sometime soon, wearing my special vest. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And then we'll have our monthly speaker, Chris Patterson from CPHA Architects.
Prop as well. It's not nearly as colourful. It's anyone who misbehaves. What it is, it's a convict brick, and we'll talk about it at the end because it is relevant. Convict bricks are only made, obviously, convict period. They're frequently known for having a thumbprint. You can all come and see if your thumb fits later on. Convicts only came to WA for a very short time, unlike other places in Australia. I wrote it down so we didn't get it wrong. Only 1850 to 1868. So anyway you look at it, it's a good 150-year-old brick. And I reckon it's in not bad condition. You can tell me what you think later on. Okay, so I do know that all of you are engaged one way or another with local government. I don't know whether you're all in planning departments or some of you are maybe in asset management for your own councils, but whichever, I hope you'll find this of some benefit. This is getting a little bit more to the nitty-gritty of how do you look after your buildings, what do you advise your constituents, what do you advise your councillors who may be wrestling between spending 10 million on a new sports pavilion, or should they spend $1 million on some maintenance, looking after things. So let's try and give you some benefit. Okay. So the first photograph, you're wondering why we've got a submarine on the image. If Gina Binet had still been here, she would be very familiar with this. It's in Fremantle. And the real reason that this image is here is the building on the right-hand side, which is the distorted image, but that is that's the winch room that pulled the submarine out of the water. They're all from these winch buildings at Fremantle. They're from about the 1940s. It's the period of the just during the Second World War, and at that time the submarine fleet based at Fremantle was the largest in the southern hemisphere. So it's all about understanding your site. See if I can understand the computer to change the page. Yeah, there we go. So other speakers have talked about understanding the place, and some things that might help you is to give you some actual examples. And here we have the winch room. You can see it on the left as it was in its heyday, without a boat on the slip. On the right-hand image, we see the same winch room with a vessel on the slipway. So straight away, we're looking here, and we've got something obviously right on the Indian Ocean, and most of you will be familiar with the things that cause corrosion and deterioration. Salt water is a big thing, and believe me, when that sea breeze is blowing, everything down here gets really well coated in salts. Salts are dynamite for acceleration of corrosion. And you think, well, what's that got to do with looking after a place? What can we advise a client or your own colleagues in your departments? Well, it probably influences better maintenance methods, better selection of materials. Why might it be worth spending a bit more on a better graded material? Well, let's see. Okay, so this is the continuing with the windshroom. And before you race in to undertake maintenance works, the best thing is to let's understand the place, in this case by the ocean, and let's understand what the issues are. So on this building, there are a whole host of issues. Big one is that it has now got deteriorating asbestos cement wall cladding, and it has deteriorating corrugated asbestos roofing and gutters. Curiously, the downpipes are not asbestos. It also has issues with timber deterioration, and the right-hand two images show a very suspect downpipe, not disposing water very well. And if you look a little bit closer on the bottom right image, what you see is the impact of timber that has not been maintained. So a lot of water disposing onto it, paint finish has not been maintained. And so to repair this, bearing in mind we're working with asbestos, there's also asbestos contamination all around on the ground and in the subsurface the soil. We need to prop up timber posts. The timber posts, by the way, are that sort of size that they're weighing tons. We need to prop them up. We need to cut out portions. We need to stitch them together with stainless steel bolts because of the environment. And you can see that this isn't a $5,000 repair. This post is $20,000, $30,000 a time to get it solved. Done once you take into account protection, keeping visitors away, safety, and so on. I've had someone manage to maintain that downpipe, got rid of the water better, kept a coat of paint. Then we might have had a few $1,000s painting exercise, but we don't. So a big problem. The right way. Yes, we have. This is just reiterating the proximity to the ocean of this one, and the whole site. As you know, at Fremantle Port, they're all industrial buildings. There's a lot of timber, variously being well looked after or not, and lots of metal. Metal we didn't mention is an issue. No. Other site constraints. It's good to be aware of what we're dealing with. This is in the large windshroom on the left. And not only do we find paints which have lead content, you'll find buildings painted dates wrong possibly, but pre-1980s, very high chance you've got a lead content in the paint. That means you're going to have a different regime for dealing with that. But don't be scared and don't let the contractors tell you this is going to push the cost up there. It doesn't. It just means you need to deal with it using a different process. But sometimes you make other discoveries, including, you'll notice there, someone has just very kindly left their bag of asbestos scraps, which is the plastic bag with asbestos on it. So you do make odd discoveries. And sometimes there are hazards and challenges where you least expect. The switchboard in the middle, black material on the back is a product called ceramite. Ceramite is very durable material, sheet material, and it's an asbestos cement product. So again, no need to be panicked about it, but it's why you need to understand the place so you can deal with this appropriately. So if you have an older building, you can't just come and modify the switchboard and screw something on. We don't drill into asbestos, we cut asbestos, we treat it with great care. Other challenges that you might experience are how will you actually undertake your maintenance or your building works? Building on the right is in the city of Perth. That's Lawson Flats, corner of the Esplanade and Sherwood Court. It's 11 stories tall. It has no parking at all. It has no land other than the building itself. There's nowhere to lay down materials for a tradesperson, nowhere to put works yard, none of these things. So if you understand this, you might in turn be able to understand what your clients are going to experience trying to do some building works to maintain this. And that might influence your planning decisions. And equally, if you are in the asset management side of your council, it's good to know when you have a difficult situation, because what that might mean is, you know, you need to block footpaths, you're going to maybe block the lane of the road, and all these things. So if you go into all of that trouble, what it might do is suggest that you look closely at the works you're doing. So don't just paint 3 windows, but say, well, we're spending all of this money, we're disrupting the public so much to do it. You know, let's group a few more things together. So you begin to value add, and it's less disruption for everyone. It's ultimately an awful lot less costly. Okay. And sometimes the needs, you know, are they compatible with the place? And I think Gina showed us a beautiful example of that super cool recording studio in North Frio. And you know, who wouldn't want to live in that amazing house with that history? But sometimes you might get faced with somebody bringing you a proposal that is just, you know, a step too far. And this is why understanding the user needs, as well as understanding the building's significance, its location, its particular construction challenges, it might lead you to a point where you really feel that the proposal is not going to be suitable for the building. This is a state government office. It's open to the public. They receive clients coming here. It doesn't suit their needs. You cannot get into the building without going up the steps. So bad luck if you use a wheelchair or you're a mum with a pram or something like this. Once you get in the building, there's no rooms, no capacity for manoeuvring your wheelchair or what have you. The building's tried to be modified. You can see some beautiful creative wiring in the bottom left. And I think the outcome of that is that the building does not fit the user needs. Therefore, it is unloved. And nobody cares for it. You can see the paint's fallen off a long, long time ago. You can see some beautiful electrical work coming through a clay wall vent. And as the building becomes unloved, it gets treated worse. It gets less cash put into looking after it. So I think this is about, you know, whether you're speaking to a client of yours looking to log a planning application, or whether you've got yours in your asset management team. This use is not a good use. It has not served the client. It has not served the building. And the problem is, it's now become a massive job to put it back because of that lack of love. You can now see we're not looking at a paint job on those windows. We're looking at, you know, major repair job, or maybe in fact it gets to the point where it's beyond recovery. But you can see from that bottom left image, you know, at one point it's been quite a magnificent house. So, you know, I feel that your job, local government, is to help to steer the users, and it's not the right building if you can't adapt it appropriately. Sometimes you might need to have that tricky conversation, say it's not a good fit. Some things, however, can be a good fit. Many things can, and they can be quite robust outcomes, depending on the building. And again, if you understand the building, you understand the user, and you understand site constraints. This is at Fremantle. It is the old plumber's workshop down on the dock. And it, as you can see, top left, definitely in need of a bit of love. And in fact, what happened, the Maritime Museum had their offices in what is now the Gage Roads Brewery on the Little B shed. Good outcome. Maritime Museum lease ran out, they had to move. So we moved them into here, into the plumber's workshop. And you can see that the big open spaces actually suited them rather well. They have their open plan share desk environment. And we did not over conserve. So everything was quite sound. So it was a pretty light touch internally. And trying to give a nod to their maritime connections. You can see that even the vents for the air conditioning with white socks. They're made of sailcloth, so you can do things to try and get that connectivity. Bottom middle shot, as pretty much the same view as the top. What happened here? We used the corrugated aluminium cladding rather than corrugated iron. So by using the aluminium, bearing in mind how close we are to the ocean, I think it's something like 70 odd meters from the port and maybe 200 from Bayswater beach. High chance of early corrosion. So worth spending the money on the very much improved product of the corrugated aluminium instead of corrugated iron in this instance. All the colours were related back to paint scrapes that were undertaken on the old building and some great historic photographs. So we were pretty confident with that green. And that seemed to spark a bit of interest, and all of a sudden Port Authority started painting, doing some paint colour research. And there's a lot more colour that's good on the board. So all the time we're saying, let's understand the building, the needs, the site. So how do you manage all of this? And one way might be that you could encourage your clients or within your own organizations to undertake feasibility studies or maintenance plans. You can cross-reference those back to conservation management strategies, which Liza was talking about, or to conservation management plans. You won't always have the luxury of having those documents, but it is the more you put in at the beginning to create a brief, the better your project outcome is going to be. And not all of your proponents about to hand you planning approval will have gone quite enough depth in that. So do please encourage them. The feasibility study, people can change their mind, a few lines in a drawing. It's very cheap compared to handing you a complete set of documents ready for tender, and then you say, oh, actually, we can't approve this. And I think that's what Liza and Catherine were saying, come often, speak to the people at Heritage Council at an early stage, but push and pull things at the early point. It's almost free. It will allow you to prioritise your works, and bear in mind that photograph we had of Blossom's flats and the difficulty of getting access to that site. These feasibilities, they'll flesh these things out for you at the very early stage, rather than just handing a work order to your favourite painter. Just paint this 3 windows. You're not getting the best out of it to do that. Staging, I think, goes along with prioritising the works, and the staging allows you to understand timeframes for projects when it will not impact most on your on building occupants, surrounding buildings. Think of Lawson's flats again. So the city of Perth, I don't know if anyone's from the city here, but in the city of Perth, over Christmas, there is the period when you're not allowed to block the streets, the building works. So actually understanding that is pretty important, because otherwise you might think Christmas is a perfect time to do your work in that building because a lot of people are not working in offices nearby. You might say that's great, but actually the city may well have a different view of the world, understanding. Feasibility study or maintenance plans, we right now are in a tremendously inflationary period of building costs. Everybody's costs have gone up, tradespeople are charging too much, the materials are costing too much, the time frames are blown out. So getting that early maintenance plan or the feasibility study is going to help you tremendously in scheduling your works. I think that it's more related, obviously, if you're in the asset management side of your government. So, but why? But why don't we just wait until the timber post at the corner of the old winch room until it's very obvious that it's so rotten it doesn't even connect to the ground? So we did talk about that. It's now become an emergency repair. It's reactive. It's happening. Well, it might have happened without a great deal of forethought about thinking of what connects to that, and that could be a huge task. Emergency works you will often find also become variation items, and in a construction contract, you want to avoid variations. You've lost all your competitive advantage. You plan something, you tender it properly, and you get 3 prices, 4 prices. People keep a sharp pencil. They would like your business. If, on the other hand, you discover something because you haven't planned properly, and you say to Fred, the builder, "Oh, Fred, can you change that post?" Fred's going to say, "Oh, thank you very much. No competition. Let's just add an extra 50% in case in case it goes a bit slower, or maybe he just fancies to buy a car." So planning will save you money. Reactive repairs also are tremendously disruptive to your own organizations. If you find something as serious as, say that timber post, you don't send the most inexperienced person in the office to fix it. You end up with a senior person going down, so very expensive. You end up disrupting all the important things that you have planned to do because this one unplanned thing parachutes itself into the middle of your day. And all told, it's pretty disruptive. So planning to do maintenance, it's not necessarily a cool thing. Your councillors would probably rather open that new sports pavilion. And I understand it, it looks good, doesn't it? But if you think it's got no value by doing the maintenance, or you're being encouraged to make it less value, then think of it this way. If you do plan and you plan your painting programs or your gutter replacement or whatever, you're avoiding those unexpected nasty surprises, saving all the disruption from sorting them, so saving a lot of your time, saving disruption to the people who are using that space, and you're releasing money back for the things that your council would like to spend for that new sports pavilion. So we would suggest to you that far from being a dull or a mundane activity, it's actually something that will greatly support your other bigger projects. Far off finishing, just really showing you some examples here. This is back to the winch house. These are all things that should be planned. This is a very, very large Jarrah post. Thankfully, it's so large the termite activity, although big, has not impacted its structural strength. We're looking at flock down pipes that are now corroded, and all in the vicinity of that huge, lovely bit of Jarrah that's rotted out. So, there's just some examples that, a little bit of time spent maintaining your termite treatments, maintaining the gutters, maintaining and think, okay, you'd be miles ahead. You mentioned earlier that, why might you change? Why might you up-spec? Why would you get benefit from doing something more expensive? This is a set of steel windows, again, in Fremantle, near, not far from the ocean. Steel windows with moving parts, and you can imagine you can imagine the level of deterioration, all the little crevices where the salts get in, and as soon as they started to be cleaned in preparation for painting, it became apparent paint was about the strongest thing left. And so on these, rather than repairing, the repairs ended up really being very invasive on their own merit. We actually replaced using the same sections but with stainless steel. And I think, well, that was expensive. Yes, it was. However, when you compare it to the cost of repairing the windows and having to keep on repairing them because you can never keep on top of the painting in that environment, suddenly this becomes quite a economic solution. And again, it's about understanding the place, understanding. So this little example here is between two commercial sheds, also in Fremantle. And what it was discovered was down the middle, there was some high voltage, very high voltage cables that supplied much of the port activities at that western end. The contractors needed to replace the heavily corroded wall sheeting. And this was an interesting situation where not all of the parties, so there was a tenant who leased the buildings, there was another party that owned the services. They didn't necessarily speak quite as early or necessarily as helpfully as they might. And this was an absolute challenge to make a safe work environment. And so I put this up just to show how important planning might be, even in something as simple as change the wall sheet. You think that, but people would have died here had they just charged along for quite a bit. This little building, this is small winchroom. It's the little sister of the adjacent one, the large one. Top left before, bottom left after conservation works. The works here became necessary because of the asbestos content and all the cladding material, but they were carried out before the fabric, structural fabric, and the lining boards and so on got to a point of no repair. So whilst it was a big job putting the new roof on and the new wall sheeting, it entirely removed that hazard. And if you look at that bottom middle photograph, you can see the structure really as good as the day it was made. So that one was tackled a little bit before the large winch. Conclusion. You're always going to get an unexpected bit of work. You're going to make discoveries. It's the nature of all buildings. You open something up and go, oh, Lord, look at that. The termites have done their business. However, by planning and getting help, now you get help from the Heritage Council. You've got help from all of these very, very good guide sheets that you'll find on the website. And you can also get some professional help from people who are building conservators or heritage architects, us, and others. Now, planned works always going to be, this is the big thing to remember, always better value for you than reactive works. It's going to be less disruption, it's going to be a smoother passage, it's less stress and headaches involves. And this is something to encourage your ratepayers as well. And some local authorities do encourage this by offering grants, and the City of Perth does, and others might as well. We would suggest to you that spend a little early stage, get your feasibility studies, the planning or maintenance plans. It's the most effective way to manage any care of the building, rather than the last minute, oh my goodness, the paint has entirely fallen off. If you get to that point, you'll probably find you're going to have other things to do as well, so your project will exponentially increase. How to start? Well, I think we've mentioned it. Heritage Council, great first point of call. They'll refer you to the website. They might refer you to some specialist consultants, and that's a good start. But that brings us back to our friend, the brick. The brick is almost perfect condition. You can build it into the wall now, and the reason for that is it has never suffered the indignities of unplanned work. No one's ever splashed cement render over it. No one's ever splashed a totally impervious paint finish over it. It's probably never been immersed in water. So there's been an understanding of how to care for this building. And I would suggest to you that with care, almost all buildings can be continued almost indefinitely to provide some valuable purpose for our community. And please feel free to come and try your thumb in a genuine convict brick. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'd be delighted to try and answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. That concludes our presentations for today. I hope you've learnt something about heritage, how to care for heritage buildings, how to assess heritage values, and using those case studies, and you can take that information back to your local government. So again, thank you.